Okay, Chairman, we're ready to go.
Thank you. Okay, so in that case, we'll start. A couple of prior announcements. The normal one, remind you that the members, we shouldn't be recording any exempt session which might occur during this meeting. And also, you're also aware of the new rule from last night is that councillors should not use a chat function unless they're reporting a technical issue. So do not otherwise make comments through chat. Obviously, put your hand up and speak.
Chairman, on point of order, can I ask whether that was debated and agreed last night?
That's true. We didn't get to that point.
If I may, Chair, the item hadn't been discussed yet, and we hadn't reached the standards agenda, the standards committee minutes. So I'm afraid it isn't valid yet.
That's true. Yes, I'm just reading off my cheat sheet here, which was written.
Someone was a bit more optimistic as to how fast we would be last night.
Yes, well, it's not. It's a minor point. So anyway, thank you for the correction, Councillor Gossett. Okay, so we are on live stream. So welcome to this virtual meeting of the new Eastern Committee. Well, not so new now. My name is Councillor Richard Cole, and I am the chairman of the committee. I'd like to confirm from Georgina that those present are members of the committee, apart from a couple of at least one observer. Is that correct?
We were going to have Councillor Rivers as a guest, and Councillor Henry did say she wanted to come, but I don't think she's here yet.
She has just arrived.
Apart from that, everyone present is a member of the committee or a substitute.
Okay, thank you. So I'm supported this evening by, I hope, Lewis Jones, Planning Solicitor. Zach Elwood, Head of Planning and Economic Development, is due to join. I've not seen him yet, but Catherine Pearson, Area Team Leader, Kate Edwards, Principal Planning Officer, Tracy Farthing, Planning Officer, and Fiona Cameron, Democratic Services Manager, and Georgina Hale, who is clerking the meeting. So members, as always, please use the hand raise function within Zoom to indicate you wish to speak, and mute your microphone when you're not speaking. As always, please keep statements brief and to the point. And we'll be timing speeches this evening, and of course, if more than 4 minutes, there'll be an alarm. And if any members of in the meeting lose their connection temporarily, we will pause to allow them time to rejoin the meeting. Of course, if the webcast stream fails, we'll have to adjourn while we reset the connection. And finally, just as many may know, I'm stepping down as chair of this committee after this meeting, and will be replaced as chair by Councillor Paul Rivers, who's watching tonight. And I'd also like to thank Councillor Else, unfortunately not present tonight, for his support as vice chair, members of the committee, and of course all the officers for their support over the last 2 years, over a variety of committees, of course, which have been in place in the last 2 years. So we move on then to item 1. Georgina, are there apologies for absence?
Yes, we've had apologies from Councillor Trevor Sadler, substituted by Councillor Richard Seaborn, and apologies from Councillor David Else.
Okay, so we are just one down for the night. Thank you. Item 2, minutes of the last meeting. Can the committee please confirm that the minutes of the meeting held on 27th of January, which are published on the council website, are adequate? Can you please indicate?
Agreed.
Thank you.
Agreed.
Declarations of interest. Georgina, have any declarations of interest been received?
Yes. For A1, we've got Councillor Follows declaring a non-pecuniary interest, and Councillor Hegan, if she's here. And also for A2, we've got yourself declaring a non-pecuniary interest.
Okay. Now, so as many of you will have heard in the early in the chat discussion earlier.
Sorry, Chairman, can I just also declare a non-pecuniary interest as chairman of the Cranley Parish Council? Okay,
but you are going to stay and speak?
Yes, I am staying. Yes. Thank you.
As are myself and Councillor Hegan in the first item, they were, as was indicated in our submission to Democratic Services.
Okay. In the case of my interest, I won't remain for the second item, which now poses a problem that since Councillor Else, who would have taken the chair and was set up to take the chair, he's absent, we are now lacking a chair for the second item. So unfortunately, that means that I'm going to call for a volunteer to chair item 2, item 8.2, the application in connection with the Cranley Village Hospital Trust application. So are there any volunteers? Unfortunately, without a volunteer, we won't be able to consider the item.
Chair, I'm happy to if nobody else desperately wishes to, although I'm sure I'll regret it.
I'm happy to second.
There's not a rush people putting their names forward, unfortunately. Councillor Follows.
Well, Councillor Goodridge put his name forward, and I'm happy to support him.
Yes, I'd support Councillor Goodridge as well. I thought I saw his hand go up.
Sorry, I didn't see anything on my display. So Councillor Goodridge, do you want to confirm that?
Please unmute.
Councillor Goodridge, are you
Yes,
there?
I'm unmuted. Sorry. Yeah, yes, I am. If I mean, I'm happy for Councillor Follows to do it otherwise, but I'm happy to chair it if you so wish.
And if not, of course, there is no vice chair either. So I'm happy to do so with the support from Councillor Goodridge, if that's appropriate to the committee, as there isn't a chair or vice chair.
Can I propose, just in terms of party allegiances of the departing or the non-absent vice chair, can I suggest that Councillor Goodridge acts as chair, and if necessary, then Councillor Follows, you can support him as vice chair.
That's fine. Thank you, Chair.
Is that acceptable to the committee?
That's fine.
Agreed.
Yeah,
agreed. Okay. In that case, thank you very much to Councillor Goodridge for that offer. Okay. In that case, we'll move forward. Questions by members of the public. Are there any questions from members of the public?
No
Georgina?
questions from members of the public.
Are there any questions from members?
No questions from members.
And has Zach joined? The next item would have
I've been here since the start.
Thank you, Fred. Just on the list of names, I hadn't seen your name float up. So the reason we're asking is the next item 6, is relevant updates to government guidance or legislation since last meeting, which would be in Beth, but I believe she's not present. So is there anything you can offer to help us on that one?
No, I presume Beth has already updated you on the MPPF proposed changes and the local design codes. We are going through consultation response on that, and that's due at the end of March. But other than that, I'm not aware of any significant changes in planning. Well, so I think we'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Item 7, as always, the polling feature has been set up, so votes can be taken on the items by general assent or using polling if needed. And of course, if a recorded vote is required, it will be done by roll call. Another item which would have been Beth, which was to advise committee of any applications which have been decided under delegated powers. Unless Zach has been paying attention, he probably won't know the answer to that. So,
Chairman, I can perhaps offer you an update
right.
on that.
Thank you.
In Beth's absence. There has just been one application since the last meeting, WA 2020-1743, which was 57 and 59 Hare Lane, Godalming, for the construction of a dual vehicular crossover and landscaping. And that application was approved under delegation on the 19th of February. Thank you, Chairman.
Thanks very much. In that case, we move on to item 8, and the first item, 8.1, WA 2020-1823, land at 123 Binscombe, Godalming, erection of a dwelling following relevant demolition of an unlisted bungalow within a conservation area. So, Tracy, can you make the presentation, please?
I can indeed. Thank you, Chairman.
Sorry, Tracy, am I sharing screen or are you?
And me, please.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. The application before you is a revision of a previous scheme, which appeared at the Eastern Planning Committee on the 21st of October last year. The previous application had an officer recommendation for approval, which was overturned on the grounds of unacceptable light to loss to 121 Binscombe. The sole change made within this application is that the proposed new dwelling has been shifted 0.4 metres northeast away from 121 Binscombe. And the applicant has also submitted extensive justification that the light will not be significantly affected to that property. The application site is within the developed area. It straddles the conservation area and is adjacent to a listed building. The existing building is a detached 1970s bungalow, the elevations of which are shown. The existing bungalow is built within close proximity to the side boundaries. Parking is featured at the front of the dwelling, in addition to an integrated carport featured close to the southeastern boundary. These photos show the existing bungalow in context. The proposed block plan shows the placement of the proposed dwelling in comparison to the existing footprint of the existing dwelling. You can see that the placement within the site is relatively similar. The proposed dwelling would be a 2-storey, 3-bedroom detached dwelling. The roof would be fully gabled. The first floor would be cantilevered, and the dwelling is proposed to be finished in brick at ground floor, with the first floor and the roof finished in tile. The design has raised no objection in terms of the impact upon the conservation area or the adjacent listed building. The floor plan in terms of designs have not changed from the previously refused scheme. The ground floor plan shows the footprint of the previously refused scheme as a yellow dashed line. The building has been moved 0.4 metres away from 121 Binscombe. The first floor plan shows the provision of 3 bedrooms, a bathroom and a balcony at the rear, and that the depth of the building would ensure that the 45-degree angle is accorded to with the rear windows of 125 Binscombe. Just to note that the 45-degree angle is also accorded to in regards to the rear windows of 121 Binscombe. This slide shows a section taken through the building. It shows the existing bungalow in red, the previously refused scheme in yellow, orange, and the proposed development. It's also worth noting that this section shows both the side boundaries are defined by treatments of 2 metres in height, and that the internal floor level of the proposed building is lower than that of the existing bungalow. The street scene below is indicative of how the new dwelling would appear within the plot and relative to its neighbours. These photographs show the varying design styles in close proximity of the application site. It's clear that there is variation also between the scale and size of dwellings along the road. This slide seeks to show the relationship to the neighbouring dwellings. Attention is drawn to the images relating to 121 Binscombe and the presence of a 2-metre boundary fence. There was some confusion at the previous committee as to how high the existing boundary treatment is. Representation has been received, and discussion at the previous committee referred to the 25-degree rule. This has been addressed within the officer's report, and the central image seeks to show that a 25-degree measurement is not accorded to by any form on that boundary. This includes the fence, the existing dwelling, or the dwelling in proposed form. This window on the side of 121 is one of 2 windows serving a habitable room. A large window is seen on the rear of the dwelling. Whilst officers do consider some impact from the development may occur, it's not considered that the harm would be so significant to warrant the refusal of this application. The recommendation is therefore for approval, and the key matters for consideration are visual amenity and design and residential amenity. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Tracy. So we have two speakers. The first speaker is Tim Nicholas, who is objecting to the proposal. Is Mr. Nicholas online? Mr. Nicholas, are you there? And is your camera turned on?
He is online. Mr. Nicholas, if you just unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yes, and we can see you. So you have your 4 minutes to speak. So please go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman. As has been stated, this application is the same as the one refused last October, except it's been moved 16 inches from my boundary. We will still be deprived of light to our side window, a window that was considered to be essential when overlooking the garden 15 years before the neighbouring bungalow was built in 1980. Understandably, only the applicant and his architect and Councillor Palmer have seen the potential effect from inside my living room. The former offered to install Velux windows at their expense to overcome the loss of light they appreciated we would experience. Councillor Palmer has previously made his views known to the committee on the adverse effect of the proposed building. The case report refers to what is described as comprehensive documentation to justify recommendation of the application. The Lights of Right report is in fact a commissioned report and is only a desktop study without inspection. It asks you to believe a wall 44 feet long, 15 feet high, and 6 feet from my window will cause no loss of daylight. This is frankly not credible. The report is apparently based on BRE guidelines, which are not mandatory. Each council adopts its own standards. Waverley is SPD October 2010. The application does not address the reasons given for the previous refusal. There are no plans, diagrams, cross-sections to address the breached SPD 25-degree rule for vertical analysis. The case report agrees the proposal would breach the 45 and 25-degree rules. The angle of obstruction will be 60 degrees to my window and 46 degrees to number 125 Binscombe. This is not just over the recommended limit, but massively over on both sides. The BRE guidelines state that with an angle of obstruction of 45 to 65 degrees, it will be very difficult to provide adequate lighting unless very large windows are used. The existing bungalow does not meet the current SPD requirements regarding daylighting, let alone a building twice the height. Nor does it meet the requirement under Rule 8.2 to be 3 meters from a boundary. The case officer states that the application breaches the rules under SPD 7.4 and 5, so it follows it must also breach Rule 5.1c, being overbearing and creating a loss of daylight. It will also breach Rule 8.2 that requires a dwelling to be 3 meters from the boundary with a neighbouring property. Approval of this application would show the council not to be acting in accordance with its own adopted SPD guidelines, which are there to safeguard the reasonable interests of occupiers of neighbouring properties. The application, although interesting architecturally, is out of scale with this small infill plot where the existing building fails to meet the requirements of SPD 2010, and I would respectfully urge the committee to refuse. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Second speaker is Simon Mariner, who is the applicant. Mr. Mariner, can you turn on your camera and unmute yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, councillors. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. So far, I can't see you.
Bear with me. I haven't got my video turned off, so.
No, that's fine. You're there now.
Okay, marvellous.
Please go ahead.
Thank you. I've lived in Farncombe for 43 years. I bought 123 Binscombe almost a year ago today with the vision of creating a forever family home for myself and my children. Having never taken on the challenge of building a house, I am no expert, so I've turned to people who are. My first approach was to see if the current bungalow could be extended, but the report showed up a lack of insulation, damp in places, and a health risk due to the use of asbestos. Basically, there was no advantage in keeping any of the bungalow. I am very conscious that part of the plot is in a conservation area and shares a boundary with a Grade 2 listed cottage. To strike the right balance, I commissioned Beckman Architecture to work on a design that is sympathetic not only to the area, but also to the plot. As you are aware, the current bungalow is tight to both side boundaries. This presented an opportunity for us to slim down the proposed new dwelling and create a larger separation to both neighbouring properties. To obtain feedback, we entered pre-application discussions with the planning department. With the absence of any concerns regarding the scale, bulk, siting or impact on neighbouring amenity, we submitted a full planning application last summer. During the planning notice period, there was an objection from number 121 due to a perceived loss of light to a secondary side window. To ensure that our design wouldn't create this potential harm, I commissioned Tuffin Ferriby Taylor to produce a right of light survey. The report concluded there would be no harmful loss of light to the room and it would remain well lit. This application was heard at the October Planning Committee and unfortunately was refused due to the concerns over the perceived loss of light to the secondary side window of number 121. The right of light survey was not referred to by the officer or the members as part of their debate. Understandably, I was saddened by the decision of the council. I've invested a lot of time, money and emotion trying to secure planning permission for our family home, and therefore, in seeking to overcome your concerns, we have resubmitted a proposal for a replacement dwelling. We have, with careful consideration, managed to move the dwelling 400 millimetres further away from the common boundary with number 121, yet still maintain a sufficient separation to the Grade 2 listed building, number 125. The separation to both neighbouring boundaries is greater than the existing bungalow currently offers. The latest application has received another objection from Mr. and Mrs. Nicholas at number 121 over loss of light to their secondary side window. As you will have seen from the photo uploaded to the documents file, the window is approximately 1 metre from the shared boundary, which is defined by a 2 metre high fence. And despite sharing the results of the right to light survey with Mr. Nicholas, his concerns have not diminished. At great expense to myself, I have also commissioned a professional daylight sunlight report. The report states that in accordance with local and national planning policy, the side window of number 121 is secondary, the primary light source to the room being the large southwest facing windows. The report concludes that there will be no noticeable loss of light. I hope the committee has had a chance to review these light reports. I've been upfront with both adjacent neighbours right from the start of this journey. I feel that I've gone out of my way to ensure everything we do is to the highest possible standards. I honestly believe that the officer's report, which has the backing from the heritage team, along with the 2 light studies, really shows that there will be no harm caused to either of my neighbours' amenities. My only aim is to build a family home fit for a green future with far less reliance on fossil fuels. All our plans meet with local and national planning guidance and I believe will be an asset to the street scene of Binscombe. To be told that I'll be forcing people to live all day by artificial light or that it be unsafe is simply not true, disingenuous and in complete contradiction to the professional light reports. I therefore respectfully request that the committee find in favour of the officer's recommendation to grant planning permission. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, just before we go on to comments from members, Tracy, there were 2 update sheets referring to this application. Could you just, one is a minor point to do with a charging point. The other one is a bit more complex. Could you just introduce that so we're clear about what it means?
Yes, Chairman, there was one update sheet that referred to the provision of electric vehicle charging. Another update sheet was produced today. I will let Kat explain that if that's okay.
fine. If someone's going to.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, the second update this evening was more a point of clarification with regards to the officer's assessment of the heritage tests. And it just confirms that we have applied those tests of the MPPF and attached great weight. The officer has attached great weight in their assessment to the preservation of the heritage asset. The conclusions of the heritage section do not change. We have not identified any harm, but in relation to applying those tests properly and correctly, that update sheet just provides a point of clarification with regards to the relevant sections of the MPPF and the statutory tests in relation to heritage assets. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Okay, as was mentioned earlier, Councillor Palmer has made comment to this, and last time I read out his comment, so I'll read out his updated comment now. Due to the pandemic, it has not been possible for officers to enter the home of Mr. and Mrs. Nicholas, but I was able to do so before the pandemic became severe. My opinion remains that the proposed wall, which I understand to be proposed at 15 feet high, 6 feet away from 121, would seriously impact the enjoyment of the living room. It is difficult to see how the plans, from the plan, sorry, but the light from the rear is not sufficient to illuminate the section of the room facing number 123, which is no doubt why there is a window there. I will not offer a recommendation as I'm not aware of all the aspects of the proposal and how far it meets the reasons why the committee rejected it last time. But in my opinion, it will certainly damage the quality of life for the Nicholases. So we move on to members. Any comment by members? Councillor Follows.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to both the members of the public for coming to speak on this. Yes, so first off, I take the words of Councillor Palmer with great weight on this, as he's actually been and had a look at it. So I'm going to say that up front, that I take that with quite a lot of material value in terms of this debate, as a lot of it does seem to be about the amenity of the light value. This gave me pause before in regards to that offer to put Velux windows in, and I do wonder why such an offer would be made unless there was an acknowledgement of a loss of amenity, or at least a concern about it.
I'm still seeing people, but I'm not seeing Councillor Follows. Is that the same for everybody else?
Seems to be that the new wall will be bigger than the fence. So I mean,
Councillor Follows. We lost you for a few seconds there.
Oh,
could you?
Sorry,
back up?
my internet's gone a little bit strange. I'm just going to turn my video off and just do audio for a minute.
Just back up about 30 seconds.
Thank you. Sorry. As far as I can see, the main issue, though, of note seems to be this issue of light amenity. So I have a couple of questions on how that's actually tested as a concept. So do they? Obviously, they can't put up the wall that's going to be there, which is bigger than the fence, and it's, in this case, the building is closer. So how do such an outside body actually measure what will be the impact of the new construction in terms of measuring measuring the loss of amenity and light? And at a more basic level, is there actually a defined threshold where the loss of light amenity is considered harmful or not from a technical perspective? Because for me, I just need to understand if that is something that is a judgment based on some guidelines, or whether there's actually a technical threshold that is crossed. And if they can do tests that are based on something that is actually reasonably comparable with what the design will end up with, or is it a desktop exercise? Is it guesswork, or based on some kind of science? I'd just like some explanation on that before we press on, if that's all right. Thank you, Chair.
Tracy, can you offer some advice on that?
Thank you, Chairman. As Mr. Mariner said in his speech, there was comprehensive lighting report submitted. Within one of those, they use a methodology outlined in which is site layout and for daylight and sunlight in 2011, which takes into account 3 main methods for calculating daylight levels, being a vertical sky component, no sky line, and average daylight factors, with the latter the main method for assessing daylight within a room. And all of those aspects are covered within the lighting report. On the basis that the layout of the property is known, it's more reasonable and accurate to consider that the other methods of assessment to establish the overall effect on the proposal may have on the daylight within 121. They're all, everything's been addressed within the lighting.
The one aspect I couldn't see in that report was what is there an actual limit for humans that's considered harmful lack of light? Is the bit that I was kind of after in this that I couldn't seem to see.
I mean, I don't have the full reports in front of me, so I wouldn't be able to answer that question without those reports in front of me.
So if I may, Chair, if there isn't a threshold that is actually a scientific threshold that is considered harm, then harm is a judgment upon us as a planning committee. Is that correct?
Well, we have to take into account a report which does not advise us that the level of lighting is inadequate.
But it also does not advise us to the level of what is harmful. It merely advises on a technical analysis of what qualifies as the light levels.
Well, that's, as you say, that's a judgment this committee has to take. I mean, Tracy, if you can, while the rest of the debate, you can have a go at looking for some more information in that report, but I'm aware that it's a complex report. Okay, we'll move on. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. I have a problem that the property has not been visited. Now, my understanding, although I think Councillor Palmer did, my understanding is that it is an L-shaped room that both windows lead into. And if this is the case, then it is perfectly possible for one part of the house to require light from the side. Now, without an officer being able to visit, and I fully understand why they can't, I would not be happy to accept their definition of a secondary window. It might well be the main window to a large part of their living space. And for that reason, I'm just not happy. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Gale.
Thank you, Chair.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Gale. Can I interrupt? Sorry, Zach Elwood has his hand up.
Yeah, okay.
So hang on a sec, let's see what he has to say. Zach.
Yeah, no, it was just firstly on Councillor Follow's points. I mean, yes, there's not a standard in planning that we follow in terms of sort of technical impact on neighbouring amenity. There is an element of judgment, and this is based partly on the 45-degree angle rule. And obviously, in this instance, there are lighting experts who have provided information. I would say that normally we are more concerned as officers with primary windows and impact on light to primary windows. And obviously what we're talking about in this instance is impact on a side secondary window within an existing room, albeit I take the point that it may be I don't know, it may be an L-shaped room. The only other thing I was going to point out is obviously that given the orientation of the properties relative to one another, you know, obviously 121 Binscombe is to the south of this property. So in terms of any sort of direct loss of sunlight to that room, it would be very, you know, it would be marginal. It would be right at the end of the day, because the sun obviously going from east to west. And I think that should be factored in as well into your consideration. But that's just my sort of 2 pence. Thank you.
Tracy, you have your hand up.
I would just like to iterate that I have been to site, that I have undertaken a full site survey as we would with any planning application. The only The only thing is that I haven't entered the building, and it's not relatively common for planning officers to enter every single room or even the building when we're looking at the impact on neighbouring dwellings.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. Councillor Gale, please carry on.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I understand that the existing building straddles the conservation area line. And from having a little read through things, I understand historically the method applied for new development in and around conservation areas was to infill with bungalows, which is probably why we see the bungalow where it is. And this should retain an open feel. I believe this proposal of the new build being 2-storey, and it is actually moving slightly closer to the 17th century timber framed house. So that's sort of one of my concerns. The other concern I have is the application was rejected previously due to lack of light, which I think we can all see. And I don't believe moving a building 16 inches is really footing the bill, in my opinion. I can't see that those 16 inches are really going to make that much difference. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cossa.
Thank you very much, Chairman. If I can just make some general comments, first of all, about the application and come on to the light, because it's clearly the critical issue. I don't think there's anything I've seen in the report or anything in my knowledge of Binscombe which gives me any reason to be concerned about the application in terms of most of its aspects. There are a whole variety, as everyone who knows the area knows, of quite different buildings in the area. I think we've had some examples given to us by the planning officer in her presentation. And frankly, it's not unsympathetic to the relevant bits it has to consider in terms of the conservation area. So broadly, it is an acceptable proposal. What we seem to have come down to in terms of this particular proposal is the issue about light and the impact on one of the neighbouring properties. Now, I've got to be honest and say that just as when I sat on the county planning committee and we dealt with applications for minerals extraction, and we had all sorts of complex technical data about dust and so on. It was terribly difficult at times for non-experts to actually take an easy view about some of those applications. And in those circumstances, what we really needed to do was rely on those that we'd employed to actually look at those issues, who did have some of that knowledge, and to take heed of it. I have to say, I didn't last time that this was considered take the view that the lighting should be in itself, although I accept there is some marginal damage here, in itself sufficient to cause us to reject the application. And that seems to be, again, the view that our officers have reached. It is one that I think we really ought to concur with. I will listen very carefully to any other arguments that people have got, but we seem to be arguing about a subjective view on which we don't have any obvious knowledge or information of our own to second guess the advice that we are being given. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Zach, you're indicating again, I think?
Yes, sorry. Just a point of clarification. There was a statement made by one of the councillors that the building was coming closer to the listed building than the existing building, but than existing. But actually, if you look at the site section on page 11, the existing building is outlined in red, and actually that is closer to 125 Binscombe than the new building. As set out by the applicant, he sought to, because it's a wide plot, he sought to bring in the margins from either property 121 and 125. So I just think that was an incorrect statement that it's coming closer to the listed building.
My apologies, Chair, that was me, and I withdraw that. Zach is quite correct.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, and me. Sorry, Zach, I thought it was moving closer.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Goodridge.
Thank you, Chairman. I mean, I think the point I was going to make has just been made by our planning officer, but it seems to me a comment was made that this is not much better than the one that we dealt with before. Therefore, the problem of light is not significantly better. But of course, the officers were recommending on the first application, which we dealt with last year, that the light was not a problem. It was only the committee by a majority thought it was a problem. It seems to me that we have expert reports telling us that to refuse this because of light problems could not be supported. And I think we've got to be very careful before we reject an application because of light to a neighbour, if we haven't got evidence to support us. And with the greatest respect to Councillor Palmer, he is not an expert, and we really must rely on experts when we make decisions, it seems to me, because if they appeal and it's thrown out, we would be in a difficult position. So, subject to what other people say, it seems the only issue is the light to the neighbour. Everything else seems to be not causing a problem, and at the moment, I am minded to go with the officer's recommendation. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Like Councillor Goodridge, I'm struggling with this one. I can understand the concern that the neighbour has, that Mr. Nicholas has. It is going to have some effect on him, and I'm struggling with what the planning issues. I'm very much minded to support this, the way the officers have made the recommendation. And I think this issue about the light report, if the officers are happy that that light report is material and is worthy of taking into consideration, then I think it's very difficult for us to argue. Subjectively, I'm sure that if I lived next door to this proposal, I would be very worried about the light impact, but we're here to accept or reject this on planning grounds, and I'm struggling to find the planning grounds to reject this.
Thank you. Councillor Darcy.
Thank you. Last time we rejected it on the grounds of the 45-degree rule being breached, I believe, and the light issue. Obviously, the two are related. Or, as far as I can see, the 45-degree rule is still breached, and the movement of the house by 40 centimetres hasn't addressed that. And so, therefore, the question is, does that matter? And I would say, well, if we have a rule, aren't we supposed to uphold those rules? It doesn't seem to me that they have addressed sufficiently the concern to put aside that 45-degree rule that we had. And the issue about whether it's a secondary or primary window is quite interesting, because I wasn't aware there was such a thing. And there are plenty of rooms with two windows where you would be hard put to say which was more important. So that kind of seems to be very much a matter of opinion rather than fact, and no report, I would have thought, could address that because it's entirely subjective. But if it's a large room, clearly you do need a window at the other end. I live in a house where the back entrance light doesn't come in sufficiently, so and we have to have lights on all the time. Essentially, it could only be addressed by having basically you have to put lights on. You'd have to have a window in it. And I think that would be the same issue for them. We don't have a 15-foot wall 6 feet away, by the way. We just have a hedge. So, and that's not 15 feet tall. So I would, I have to say that, yeah, I'm pretty damn certain that a 15-foot away, a 15-foot wall 6 feet away, it will severely impact on the light, judging from where I live. So therefore, yeah, I think that they haven't met our concerns on that matter, and that we rejected it last time. I don't really see the reason why we wouldn't reject it this time. Thank you.
I was going to ask an officer, but I see Zach is indicating. Zach, can you explain that the purpose of the 45-degree, how it works up for a side window, plus anything else?
Yeah, well, I'll pass over to Tracy on that, but I was going to say that, I'm sorry to correct members again, but Councillor Darcy has just said the 45-degree rule has still not been met, but the officer's report clearly states on page 17 that it has been met, and that was made clear in the presentation. So I think this is a somewhat of a non-issue. Yes, of course, you need to consider the impact on any windows, but the other point I'd say about the 45-degree rule is that is a rule of thumb. It's something we use as a starting point. That's not to say that every breach of the 45-degree rule automatically is responded to with a refusal of planning permission. And obviously, if we did, having not had that as a specific adopted policy, I think we would find ourselves in tricky water when it comes to an appeal. But the officer's judgment is that the previous scheme was acceptable in terms of impact on light. Our view is that moving it 40 centimetres, I appreciate that's not a huge amount, but it certainly makes a benefit. And it does now mean that the 45-degree rule is met. So I'm sorry for correcting members again, but I think we have to base we have to base this on the facts rather than statements of opinion. Thank you.
I'd like to come back because in fact Zach's incorrect. If you look at page 18, it clearly says for 121 Binscombe, the 45-degree rule would be breached. It's true it doesn't breach it for 125, but it does for 121, which is why we refused it in the first place.
Tracy, do you want to comment, please?
Thank you, Chairman. The 45-degree rule in regards to that secondary window, which we have classified as a secondary window, is breached. You cannot measure a 12-metre distance without it being obscured by, you cannot measure a 12-metre rule without it being obscured by the built form, the proposed built form. Neither is it accorded to at the moment. So in regards to that secondary window, no, it wouldn't be, the 45-degree wouldn't be accorded to. What I raised my hand for is because I have undertaken a site visit. I also visited number 121 Binscombe, and the primary window, the principal window on the rear of their elevation, is double doors flanked by another window pane either side, floor to ceiling. And I'm kicking myself for now not adding that photo to my presentation as evidence that is why we have considered this side window as a secondary window. So officers believe that the side window in question is classified as a secondary window. And as already stated, officers aren't saying that no harm has been identified, that the proposal would have some impact, but that it wouldn't be so significant as to warrant refusal of this application. Thank you.
Chairman, can I apologise to Councillor Darcy? He's quite right. I picked up on the bit at the bottom where it said it's 45-degree rules accorded to in terms of rear windows. But yeah, apologies. I stand corrected. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Seaborn.
Thank you, Chairman. If I remember correctly, at the previous meeting where we turned this down, actually part of the concern was that the 25-degree and 45-degree tests hadn't actually been carried out, and so we had a discussion about what we thought they might be, and decided that they'd be adverse. But I'm not sure they'd actually been carried out. However, to me, this is all boiling down to the actual definition of which is primary and which is a secondary window. And Mr. Mariner in his presentation actually mentioned that there was in planning terms substantiation for the back window of 121 being a primary window. I just whether officers can clarify, is there anything in planning law which goes beyond, the subjective decision that the bigger window is the primary window, because that really seems to be the essence of the issue to me. We've stated clearly that the side window would be adversely affected in the terms of our 25 and 45 degree rule under the SBD, the 2010 SBD. That's clear, that's accepted. So at the end of the day, is that side window irrefutably a secondary window? And if it is, then I'm happy to accept the officer's recommendation. If there's argument in planning as to whether it's a secondary window or not, it becomes more complex for me. Thank you.
Tracy, can you answer that question?
Chairman, if I may come in and just add my voice to the debate this evening. Members, before you this evening is a judgment. It is a judgment based on your experience as planning committee members and based on your guidance that you have to help you make a decision in this instance. There is no strict definition of what is a primary or a secondary window. My understanding and my interpretation of those terms has always been that a primary window is the one that provides the most aspect and light, the primary aspect from a room and the primary source of light to a room. And there are a variety of factors that affect what is a primary window and not. So from the information that you've got before you this evening, you have seen a picture of that side window. Tracy, the case officer, has described to you the other window, which appears to be much larger and provides the uninterrupted aspect from the property. As a professional planning officer, I'm minded to advise you that, in my opinion, the window affected most by the light on the side is a secondary source of light, an aspect to that room, and it is not the primary window. Obviously, it is for you to make that judgment. We cannot provide you with any further guidance in that respect, I'm afraid. But on the basis of the information that we've got, we are satisfied as planning officers that those windows are correctly labelled for you and that you can make your assessment on the basis that that window on the side is a secondary window. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. I think we've been around this several times now. We've had the advice. I think we've now got the information to move to a vote. So unless anyone has really something else to say, which is going to add anything extra, then we will move to the vote. So the vote is to approve, to be granted conditions, subject conditions. Well, it's 1 to 11 on the sheet. There's one more condition, I think, from the to do with the added PowerPoint for the electric charging vehicle. So probably 1 to 12, and informatives 1 to 3. So can we please have the vote up? So obviously 4 is to grant permission.
So I've got one committee member who hasn't voted yet. I've got 13 who are showing on the poll as having voted.
I haven't voted because it hasn't come up on my screen.
Oh, right. Can you let me know which way you're planning on voting?
I'm voting with the officer's recommendation.
So for the recommendation to grant.
4.
In that case, if I share the results, so that will be 10 for and 4 against and no abstentions. So that is carried.
Okay, thank you very much. So we'll move on to the next item, 8.2, land at South John Wilson Drive. So I'll declare an interest in withdraw. Councillor Goodridge, your name is actually corrupted on the Zoom, so you might correct it. It looks a bit, you've missed out the R.
Oh, Goodridge, yes.
Or someone can correct it anyway. Just
the officers could do it. Sorry.
All right, thank you. I'll monitor on on the YouTube stream. If something comes up which is not to do with this next item, I might return, but I'll assume not, since this is the last item on the agenda. So thank you, members. I'll sign off here. Thank you, Chairman.
Well, we now move to agenda item 8.2, WA 2020-0965, the erection of a building to provide 64 bed care home, including 16 community beds, together with a building to provide 14 health workers accommodation units, with access from Knoll Lane, associated parking and ancillary work. Revision of a 1966 as amplified, as set out, at land off John Whisker Drive on east side of Knoll Lane, Cranley. And we have our officer, Kate Edwards. I think we've had quite a lot of updates today. So perhaps, Kate, you could deal with all those at the same time.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. And I would actually like to, prior to moving to my presentation, there's one particular item on the update sheet which was circulated today, which I think it would be pertinent for me to discuss with you first. Yep. We have actually received a request from the applicant that the decision on the application be deferred. This isn't something that officers agree with, so officers feel that the applications can still be heard and there's no planning reason for deferral, so the recommendation of officers stands for refusal. But notwithstanding that, I'd like to take you through the detail of the update sheet in relation to that item.
Yes, please. Thank you.
So the applicant submitted a statement saying that the statements which I had made in the report in relation to how the community beds would be provided are prejudicial to the applicant, and that they're contrary to comments made in the previous report saying there is demand for beds, and there's no explanation of that. And that the applicant has not been allowed the opportunity to engage with the detail as to the legal agreement wording. They've also said that the comments of Surrey County Council have not been seen by the applicant prior to the report publication, and refer to Surrey County Council committee report, which states that there is a shortage of care beds, which is directly contradicting their statement. And the applicant has requested a deferral, saying that that would allow the wording of the legal agreement to be worked up in order to provide Cranley Parish Council and Surrey County Council with reassurance as to how the beds would be provided. So in terms of my comments as an officer in relation to those things, I'm obviously sorry that the applicant felt that the comments were prejudicial, which is obviously not my intention. I've subsequently discussed the matters further with the applicant and confirmed within the update sheet here that it is likely that the proposed methods of allocating the community beds would be achievable, notwithstanding obviously that the beds would be assessed in terms of means and needs in the usual way. But ultimately that statement doesn't alter the planning assessment of the application, in that there would be public benefits through the provision of the community beds, which would be beyond that were they provided as fully private care beds. But again, that assessment doesn't alter the fact that in officer view, the harm caused through the scheme wouldn't be outweighed by those planning benefits. In terms of the comments in relation to the applicant not being able to engage with the wording of a legal agreement, I can advise that it wouldn't be a standard practice for officers, whether an application is recommended for approval or particularly for refusal, to engage with an applicant over the detailed wording of a legal agreement prior to a committee resolution being reached, because obviously that would have potential to result in quite a lot of abortive work for a lot of people. And in relation to I suppose the reason for deferral, saying that the applicant would like to work up the wording of the legal agreement. I don't consider this a planning reason, and I also don't consider that would be likely to materially alter the planning assessment, which is why officers aren't supporting a deferral. But notwithstanding those comments, obviously, Chair, you may want to, give councillors an opportunity to comment on the applicant's request.
Yeah, can you just comment on one thing, Kate? On page 62 of the report, under recommendation number 3, it puts down, in the absence of a completed legal agreement, to secure a travel plan and provision of affordable housing in perpetuity, the proposal conflicts with policy. I can see, therefore, why the applicant feels that they've got to get the legal agreement sorted before the meeting. Could you just comment on why we have refusal number 3?
Yes, and that's the sort of refusal reason that we include as a standard, really, when we're refusing an application which would otherwise be subject to a legal agreement. It's there so should the applicant wish to appeal, we obviously have the opportunity at that stage to secure the legal agreement, because we can't obviously later in the day raise an issue as to various policy provisions which a legal agreement would cover having not been met. So in that respect, it is a standard issue, and ultimately the officer recommendation as outlined is for refusal. So it wouldn't be prudent to engage in the completion of a legal agreement for an item which is recommended for refusal.
Okay, I understand that. Now, does any members of the committee want to speak on the question of deferral? Councillor Cossa.
Yes, I'm not necessarily going to propose deferral at this stage, but there is still part of the concern that's been raised by the applicant, which I still don't quite understand. I do recall that when we discussed this before, there was quite a lot of debate about the benefit to be provided to the local community as part of this application. And the one thing I had not fully understood when I read this report was why an apparent position, whether it's, I still don't fully understand this either, whether it's by the county council or the new integrated care grouping, seemed very much in support last time of the need for some of the provision here, but we now seem to be being told that actually they don't think there is a need, but maybe I've got that wrong. And in that sense, I've got quite a lot of sympathy with what the applicant has said, because we are being asked to decide at the end of the day whether whatever, and we can debate this later, of course, Chairman, whatever problems there may be with the bulk and so on of the design, one of the significant issues is, does it provide sufficient public benefit to outweigh that? And I now find myself not fully informed on that, and I'd like to feel the officers can help us a little bit more on that. Otherwise, I might just be inclined to ask the committee to debate the deferral, because I think it's quite a key issue on which it's very hard to understand what the current position is.
Thank you. Councillor Follows.
So I do have some sympathy with the point that Councillor Cossa's made there. As far as I can see, though, they've changed their position, as it's their right to do over time, and the officers have explained that in the update sheet. And as such, a deferral wouldn't be necessary. So obviously, I'm very keen to hear an answer to Councillor Cossa question as well, in case I've got the wrong end of the stick. But it very much just sounds like they've changed their mind and have submitted a different statement. So I will obviously wait for that answer as well.
Perhaps we can officers answer that before I move on to Councillor Townsend.
Yes, certainly. Councillor Follows is correct that the Surrey County Council position has changed from the previous application. The application which is currently before us has been delayed while there was consideration of the application in relation to the ICP's withdrawal of support for a block booking of the community beds, i.e. having a repeated business of letting the beds over a longer period of time. So in that respect, the position has changed in the intervening years, which I understand from the comments of Surrey County Council is due to a move towards the provision of care for people within their own homes.
So if I may, Chair, it might be prejudicial, but it is fact.
Yeah, okay. Councillor Townsend.
Thank you, Chair. I would just like to say, with regards to the comment that Councillor Costa made, yes, the landscape has changed, and CVHT have known this for some time. Back in October 2020, there's a very long article on their website explaining exactly how the actual landscape has changed, that the ICP introduced a comprehensive model of personal care. They changed their stance completely. You can read all of the details. So the applicant has known the changing landscape since October 2020 and has had to adjust, obviously, its application in order to accommodate that changing landscape. So it isn't something that's happened today. It is, you know, very unfortunately something that happened some time ago, and that has obviously affected this application, but it hasn't happened over the last, you know, couple of weeks or last week.
Okay, I've got one more speaker on the deferral situation. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. I read the application for a deferral, and I fully agree with the officers. It's not being asked on planning grounds. And I think we're sitting here as a planning committee, not here to allow people to take other actions away from the planning scene. Legal, whatever, with Surrey County Council or anybody else, actually has nothing to do with what we're being asked to do tonight. I think this has been hanging over the people of Cranley for such a long time, and really, we should get on with it. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Does anyone wish to propose a deferral? Because if we don't have a proposer and a seconder to defer, then we will carry on. Right, I'm not getting any indication that anyone wishes to make a proposition to defer, so we will proceed. And this is therefore I'll ask Kate Edwards to give her full presentation, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. If I could ask for the screen to be shared with the presentation, that's brilliant, thank you. So the application is for the provision of a 64-bed care home, which would include 16 community beds, and a building to provide 14 dwellings, which would be provided as healthcare worker accommodation at a discount beyond market rent. So here we can see the location plan with the site outlined in red. As you can see, it's a roughly triangular area of land, which is currently a green field and was previously used as a playing field, although the playing field has now been re-provided elsewhere.
Sorry to interrupt. Can we sort out background noise? I think, can we mute everybody except Kate Edwards, please?
Yes, my sincere apologies, Chair. That may have been background noise that's here. Unfortunately, it sounds like there's some issues going on downstairs, so my sincere apologies for that. You can see on the screen here from the location plan the Downs link, which runs to the north of the site there, and John Whisker Drive beyond. John Whisker Drive is a residential street which contains, as you can see from the plan there, terrace properties, which I understand are in use as masonettes. And beyond that, further north is the car park for M&S, which some of you may know, and the site's bound to the east by Knoll Lane, sorry, to the west by Knoll Lane. And here you can see some photos of the surroundings to the application site. The image on the left there is looking up towards the car park of M&S. The driveway, which you can see turning off there, is to John Whisker Drive, the residential road adjacent to the site. And in the image on the right, you can see the start of the Downs link as it adjoins the site, with the application site directly behind. You can see it was this photo was taken at a somewhat more leafier time of year, and you can see the field which appears yellow behind the trees here that is the application site. And here you can see a photo looking across the application site towards Knoll Lane. So as you can see, it's open field conditions with an established tree line to the boundaries. And here you can see the proposed site plan, and I've actually provided you with the landscaping plan here, as that shows the location of the buildings more visually. So the buildings are the areas in white. The larger of the buildings to be provided with the cruciform design would be a care home, which would obviously have 64 beds, as I've stated, and 16 beds which would be available at a lower rent to potentially members of the Cranley community. As you can see, surrounding the site, areas of landscaping would be provided, and that there would be tree planting. You can also see adjacent to the cruciform building there, the proposed care home, you can see a greener area which would provide a dementia garden for residents. You can also see between the two buildings here in the site plan that an area of parking would be provided. This would provide 46 spaces to serve both buildings, 14 of which would be allocated to serve the key workers accommodation block, and the remaining 32 of which would be provided to serve the care home in line with Surrey's guidance on the matter. And then you can see here in the northern portion of the site, the proposed key workers block would be provided, which, unlike the previous application on the site, would provide full self-contained dwellings in the form of 10 one-bedroom and 4 two-bedroom units. The detail would obviously be worked out as to how these would be allocated, but it's intended that they would be available to key workers at a discount beyond market rent. Thank you. Next slide, please. So here you can see some elevations of the proposed care home. It would be a total of 60 metres in both axis, with obviously 4 separate wings in a cruciform form. It would be predominantly 2 stories with part 3-storey. And as you can see, it would have a design with a varied roof form and various gables within the elevations. And here's the elevations for the key workers block, which would echo the design of the care home, and again have various false gables to break up the elevation. That building would be 37 metres long and approximately 20 metres wide. And here you can see just a detail zoomed in relation to the floor plan of the care home on one of the wings of the care home. So you can see that the beds would be provided within the wings and would have ensuite facilities with more communal facilities and staff facilities towards the centre of the building. And here's the proposed ground floor plan for the key workers block, which would contain 7 units on each level, with two bedroom flats on each level. And they would comply fully with the nationally described space standards in terms of internal floor area. So the key matters for consideration for the committee are the principle of development, the planning history, the community benefits of the scheme, the housing type and tenure, given that the current scheme triggers a need for affordable housing, the impact on the countryside and visual amenity, access, parking and highways impact, the impact on residential amenity, flood risk and drainage, trees, biodiversity and archaeology. And the key part of the assessment, as Councillor Cossa rightly pointed out, is the planning balance in terms of the harm of the scheme versus the public benefits. So that brings me to the end of the presentation. I would also like to now finish off presenting to you the update sheet which was circulated prior to the meeting. I've obviously updated you on the deferral request. I also have an update within the sheet in relation to comments received from the applicant in relation to the counting of representations and how Cranley Parish Council's comments have been presented in my report. The applicant has raised concern that the representations received as listed in the report refer to individual comments received rather than the number of individual households who've made comments, which is correct. As presented in the report, in our usual practice, we list the number of comments received rather than the number of individuals or households who have commented. But notwithstanding that, we have analysed the information due to the applicant's concern that it may not be entirely clear. And on that basis, we found that there were 40 comments which were submitted by a person who had already commented. And with those removed, there were 430 individuals who submitted objections and 240 individuals who submitted comments in support. And in relation to the comments of Cranley Parish Council, the applicant has asked that I clarify the context within which the Parish Council has made comments, which was indeed included within their letters to us. Given that they have multiple functions in relation to this site, as they also are the adjacent landowner and I believe beneficiaries of a covenant. So as a planning consultee, the applicant has made various comments, and in their capacity as an adjacent landowner, they've made separate comments, and I've separated those out in the update sheet. I wanted to also present to you a correction of a typographical error in my report, in the section of my report in relation to the impact on adjoining occupiers. I say that there would be a significant harm to the light, outlook and privacy of John Wesker Drive. What I actually meant to say was that there would not be a significant harm. So I just wanted to clarify that that was my view. I've also got an update in relation to additional representations which have been received in relation to the item since the publication of the committee report. 39 additional comments have been received, which were objecting, meaning that there is now a total of 465 comments which have been received objecting. And the reasons for objection, which weren't within the original report, are that the proposal isn't viable, there'd be an adverse impact on the Downs link, a new 25-bed care home has recently been consented in close proximity, people prefer to stay in their own homes for care, and there is no evidence of the assessment process for the community beds or how the shortfall would be met. And finally, on the update sheet, I just give a list of 2 informatives which were omitted from my original report in relation to the plan numbers and the usual obligations under paragraph 35. And that is everything within my update. So thank you very much, Chair, for the opportunity to present the item to you.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Kate. I'm sailing this ship blind because I haven't had any crib notes or anything, but I think we have 2 speakers, have we not? Looking at who's with us. Councillor Rowena Tyler from the Cranley Parish Council and John Snedden. Could that be confirmed to me, please?
There's an objector and there's a person speaking in support, and there's somebody from Cranley Parish Council.
Right. Okay. Well, let's start with the speaker from the Cranley Parish Council, which I think is Rowena Tyler. You have
Good
4
evening.
minutes. Good evening. You have 4 minutes, and off you go. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Chair. I take it that you can all hear me.
Yes, we can.
Right. The Parish Council entered into a land swap arrangement with CBHT in 2010 with the express intention of providing land for a hospital in Cranley to return the provision of community beds. The Parish Council did not support the original planning application due to the change in community bed allocation, and it does not believe that the community benefits are such as to support the exceptional circumstances required on a site beyond the settlement boundary on the area of strategic visual importance, which was found to be sound in LPP1. Now, this development would be contrary to WBC development policies and the MPF and the protection of countryside beyond the green belt, in addition to the local landscape designation of the ASVI. There is the loss of the Surrey County Council and the Clinical Commissioning Group support for the community beds. SCC have stated that they have sufficient capacity for residential care beds through existing contracts, and the CCG have not come forward to identify a deficiency in nursing beds for meeting their demands in this area. SCC have moved to the D2A model to focus on the provision of short-term care and re-ablement in people's homes following admission to hospital, and their current funding arrangements are strongly linked to this model. The community beds are no longer free at the point of entry. They are now means tested. The Parish Council did not support the accommodation block in the original application, as there is no legal link between the care home and the accommodation block. Parish Council has previously stated that the definition of essential local workers is public sector employees who provide frontline services in areas including health, education, community safety, such as NHS staff, teachers, police, firefighters, military personnel, social care and child care workers. The accommodation block cannot be considered auxiliary to the care home when its occupation is not limited to healthcare workers in the care home, but can include public sector employees from anywhere in the county of Surrey. Without the accommodation block being auxiliary to the care home, it is merely development on land outside of the settlement boundary and within the ASI. The previous planning application was only granted permission by Waverley Borough Council for exceptional circumstances to build a hospital with significant community support within the parish. This current planning application is for two very large-scale buildings on a greenfield site outside of the settlement boundary of Cranley and in an area of strategic visual importance. The scheme provides 16 community beds, no longer free at the point of entry and no longer supported by the SCC and the ICP, and an accommodation block for public sector employees from anywhere in the county of Surrey with no connection to the care home whatsoever. There is a lack of clarity in the legal agreement for securing an allocation of the community beds and no details of the role of a proposed anonymous benefactor in the scheme. Serious questions remain about the viability of this scheme. There is also no contribution to local infrastructure through developer contributions. The Parish Council does not agree with this current planning application. It does not meet those exceptional circumstances that previously permitted a hospital with significant community benefits on this particular site. The Parish Council strongly objects to this application. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. And we now have next speaker, Andy Webb. You have 4 minutes. Mr. Webb, floor is yours.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Yes. Good evening, Mr. Chairman and councillors. There are several reasons why this application should be refused. The proposals are an overdevelopment of the site, which is designated ASVI, and one of the last green spaces in the centre of Cranley. The whole character of this area is and always has been rural, which is why in 2001 the head of Waverley Planning expressed concern that the site was both within the ASVI and outside the village envelope for development. The residents of John Wiscar Drive will be adversely affected by this development by the sheer size of the buildings and by the levels of noise, light and traffic pollution. The junction of Knoll Lane with the High Street is already hazardous. This will be exacerbated by the increased traffic entering and exiting it. Construction traffic will compound the problem and the narrow pathways will prove to be a danger to pedestrians. Infrastructure in this part of Cranley is struggling to cope with the two large developments opposite this site, and these buildings will put even more strain on it. Knoll Lane is liable to surface flooding and developing this greenfield site, which is still listed as Flood Zone 2 on the Environmental Agency map, will compound the flood risk. I have organised petitions with close to 5,000 signatures opposed to this development. There are also over 400 objections on the WBC planning portal, which demonstrates the strength of feeling of the local populace to this application. NHS strategy has changed recently in favour of supporting care at home, which is why the Guildford and Waverley ICP withdrew its support from the CVHT project. In addition, there is no support for this proposal from the local CCG or Surrey County Council. Neither can I see any support from the local medical practice, which one would expect in a project such as this. The beds that are claimed to be for the local community and free at the point of access are in fact complete opposite. They are for any resident in the Surrey area. They will be means tested, unlike the beds in the old hospital that the CVHT claim they are replacing. If the funding is no longer available for the community beds, they will be leased back to the care home provider. We will simply be left with a private care home. Is this what the people of Cranley in good faith raised so much money for? Close to this site lies Knoll Park Nursing Home, which is expanding. There is also 3 nursing homes within a 3-mile radius. Do we really need another private care home in Cranley? The accommodation block is not needed. The rent is on par with other accommodation in the area. There is no clarity as to whether there is a formal link between the care home and the accommodation block, which I find worrying. I am also concerned that in the future a change of use might be applied for, so that this becomes a purely profit-making enterprise. Is this project actually viable? Where is the long-term funding coming from? Do we have a care home provider willing to put up the money for these expensive buildings? CVHT have not made this clear. How long can a charity with no backing from local authorities or the local community keep going? And where is the benefit to the local community? The covenant on the paddock field states that the land has to be used for the benefit of the community. This application falls way short of that criteria. Morally, the land should be returned to the parish council and preserved as a green space for the whole community to enjoy. The alternative is a concrete monolith which would become a white elephant in years to come. The original outline planning permission was granted in 2003 was for a replacement village hospital and health centre. I believe that is the only reason the permission was granted. What is now being proposed is nothing of the sort, and for all these reasons, the planning application should be refused. There is also no significant change to the last application that was refused. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Webb. And I think the final speaker who is for the application is Mr. Snedden. Snedden, yes.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Oh, I beg your pardon. Thank you, Chairman. I mean, I think the previous 2 speakers illustrate in part why we do need the 106 agreement wording. They've mentioned things about links to the care home, links that this will be key worker accommodation purely for healthcare workers. This could all be sorted out in a legal agreement, and I think some of you would appreciate that reassurance. Certainly the 2 people who've just spoken would appreciate that reassurance. We've reduced this scheme significantly from the previous scheme. that there's been a 20% improvement in terms of the footprint of the care home, and a 25% increase in open space and green space because we've changed the parking layout and reduced parking and changed the road network. These things were done in specific response to points made by the committee and officers in late 2019 and the parish council. It's worthy of note that when the parish council first looked at this application in July 2020, they raised no objections. There is comment about the land deal done in the past between the parish and the trust, which delivered the established playing field close to the site. The Charity Commission is quite satisfied in the face of complaints made that the proposal satisfies the objectives of the charity. It is not the general healthcare beds that were present in the past at the closed hospital now, something the trust and others fought via a legal challenge, but is directly responding to an area with a striking and increasing proportion of older people, as stated in the 2018 local plan, and affordable key worker problems. The council approved 3 applications in the past at this site for healthcare accommodation. The last of those only expired in 2015. This only did not happen because the council changed, the county council and the NHS changed priorities. This alternative option began in 2017 with pre-application discussions with Waverley, which were positive in terms of the principle. The planning issue here is whether the social and community benefits outweigh the harm identified. It is as simple as this and leads to the next question. What weight should be given to the affordable key worker accommodation and care home for the elderly that includes 16 affordable beds for people in and around Cranley? I need not tell this group how important these issues are. Your local plan stresses this many times. On the key worker accommodation, this would be for affordable rent, a tenure that's made up 50% of the type delivered by Waverley since in the 5 years before 2019, but purely for NHS and healthcare workers. A simple process in a legal agreement. We would apply for this accommodation long before the current crisis. Any income that the trust raises will be used for local healthcare via grants and other means. In terms of the county and the care trust changing their strategy, in their response in September, having said in August that they fully supported the proposal, in September they said they changed the strategy. In that report in 2019, which they reference, they say that they've got a shortage of residential care beds and that they were only able to place people in care need at their rates in 40% of the cases. That's why I asked for a deferral. How could they say that in 2019, then support us in August 2020, and then change their minds in September? I think this application should be approved because of the benefits. These benefits are massive. Healthcare workers and a care home that's going to provide affordable beds for people. Thank you. I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Chairman. I apologise for going over the time.
Thank you, Mr. Snedden. No problem. Right, I'm now going to throw it open to the committee to debate. And the first speaker I've got is Councillor Townsend.
Thank you, Chairman. This is obviously quite a contentious application, as you can tell from the number of residents' comments. And I know we had an email on Monday saying that there are only a small number of vocal objectors, but that's not quite accurate. The proposed benefits from this application have diminished further since we heard it last December and when we refused it. As has already been mentioned, the ICP, who are the experts in this field, have withdrawn their support. Surrey County Council, who are the experts in adult social care, say they have sufficient capacity for residential care beds now, and also that they're concentrating care in people's homes, has been said by the speakers. And also the care partner, the care home partner, HC1, is also no longer a partner in this application. The care provider is yet to be named. The proposal is to offer this 16 beds initially to the local authority or the ICP at local authority prices, and then there is a process which is outlined in our reports. It's fairly complex, but that is no different to any other care home within Cranley. They offer beds to the local authority at local authority rates. Should the beds not be allocated, as I said, there's another process. And it's unclear how that would actually work, even with a legal agreement in place. But what is clear is that whether an individual self-funder from Cranley would end up substantially benefiting from a cheaper bed, it is completely unquantifiable. We don't know how many people, local people, could end up benefiting from basically reduced fees. There's no numbers available, and it's not at all measurable. And whilst, you know, the CVHT might be able to carry out some additional charitable works, as laudable as that is, also, you know, it's not quantifiable as a community benefit. We don't know what that would be or how that would be measured. I'm sure we all appreciate the landscape against which, you know, CVHT are operating. It has changed, fundamentally changed, and that's really tough for them. But alongside this, the community benefits have diminished. And the site is entirely outside of the settlement boundary on an area of strategic visual importance, which is like a mini green belt for Cranley. And it was found to be completely appropriate for this status by the Inspector of Local Plan Part 1. I entirely support the officer's recommendation and their comment that the introduction of these two very large buildings between 10.7 and 12 metres high will cause considerable harm to the ASVI and to the character of the area on Knoll Lane. The accommodation block has moved nearer to the residents on John Whisker Drive, and I disagree slightly with officers in that I believe that this 24/7 operation will have a negative effect on residents from sound and light, particularly those residents at the beginning of John Whisker Drive because of the orientation of their homes, which go towards the centre of the site. You know, we've got permission for over 1,600 homes already granted in Cranley, with the remainder being allocated by the neighbourhood plan. Within this number, there are approximately 480 already of affordable homes being built, many within a really short walking distance of this site, with a choice of tenures from affordable rents to shared ownership. There is no assessed need that healthcare workers need these homes more than shop workers or indeed any other workers in Cranley. This would be agreeing to just building more housing outside the settlement boundary on a greenfield site on an ASVI to supplement what is a commercial organisation. It's no longer a community project, which it did start out as, to raise money for a hospital, with the task of raising, you know, £2 million, with an endless list of fundraising events. People even left legacies, children paid their pocket money in. The community support for this has dwindled as time has gone on. The project has lost its heart. And there is no doubt that the community feels shut out as well. They've seen the money they raised dwindle, parish land, which was sold for £1, being used to benefit what they effectively see as a commercial organisation with, yes, some charitable objectives. CVHT have not kept the community on board. I'm sad to say that, but it is true, and have continually refused requests to meet with residents. Sadly, even our own attempts at the parish council to persuade CVHT to involve the community have also failed. The sad reality of this is that the hospital, when the project failed, which was a huge blow, I appreciate that for CVHT, the trust withdrew into itself. It closed its ears to the various voices of the community, and that is how it has regrettably remained. This application should be refused tonight, as recommended by the officers, for all the reasons stated by them and also by the speakers as well. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor. And my next speaker is Councillor Denis.
Thank you, Chair. Can I start off thanking Kate for her report and her updates? I found it really helpful going through what is actually a very complicated issue. So thank you, Kate, for your hard work on this. And I sort of looked at some of the big points that came out for me, and that was it's a greenfield site. It's clear it's going to cause harm to the ASVI and the landscape and the intrinsic character and beauty of the countryside. And I think that goes throughout the report. Clearly, this application is a reduction in floor space, but when you read the report and the evidence, the overall visual impact won't be reduced. So you're not reducing the floor space and reducing the impact. It doesn't do that. But it also, with the reduction in the sizes and everything, the scale of benefits are lessened. So we've got less benefits for the community than the previous refused application, and that causes me a lot of concern. When I looked at the size of the building and it talks about 60 metres, I then went online to see exactly how big is 60 metres. It is 196 foot and 10 inches. So if you visualise, those sections are almost 200 foot long. That is horrendous. I am pleased to see that the accommodation block at least meets space standards, but the accommodation block, 122 feet long and 66 feet wide. They are huge blocks of buildings being put in the countryside. I have to admit, I'm concerned also about the entrance being opposite the Berkeley homes. I know that hasn't been a reason for refusal or grounds, but having an estate and this right next to each other along Knoll Lane, I think is very, very dicey. Looking at pages 36 and page 37, which are the consultations, and taking into account what Councillor Tyler and Andy Webb have said, they've put in 3 submissions. I won't bore everybody reading them out because I'm sure everybody's gone through them. But I have to say, I think they are powerful reading. They really do set the scene from the parish. Other issues I've got is the Thames Water saying existing water infrastructure, not sufficient. We hear this all the time. Yes, we can put conditions in, but actually virtually every single application now in this area has an issue with water and sewage. I'll leave it just as that. Page 47 gives the reasons for the refusal, and that's the refusals for 2018/1966. And I looked at those reasons and then looked at the evidence, and I've looked at what's been said tonight. And actually, the same 3 reasons jump out to me straight away. Now, the question is for us as individuals, have these reasons been overcome? And the answer is simple, no. Page 48, the second from last paragraph, it says, we consider that the scheme is on the margins of viability and is unlikely to be able to support any further planning contributions. Well, that's hardly encouragement for me. And on the next page, the last paragraph, it talks about the uncertainty how the proposed system will work, how the beds, how it could be agreed. It's already been raised by Councillor Townsend about Surrey County Council and the change in the way that people will stay longer in their own homes. That gives me some real concerns. And especially when you then add the integrated care partnerships agreement, not being able to make that commitment. Page 53 states application actually has a greater visual impact due to its spread. I absolutely agree with that. I know the area incredibly well. And it's also going to have a large expanse of hard surface concentrated in one area. So it's going to look like I was going to say Sainsbury's, but it could be a Tesco's or Asda's car park in the middle of it. It is not what Cranley is about. It's going to create nighttime illumination from a time where there's a nighttime darkness. And I think from the Downs link, it's going to have a visual impact having 2 large buildings. To summarise, Chair, this breaches the following policies from Waverley: SP2, RE1, TD1, D1, D4, RE3, ST1, AHN1. So that is 8 policies this breaches. And I'm sorry, when it breaches 8 policies, I cannot support the application, and I will go with the officers, pending what my colleagues say after me. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Follows.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the speakers on this one as well. So listening to everybody so far, it's clearly a pretty emotive application in Cranley. Obviously, we've got a duty to review this in an objective way as we possibly can, considering the facts in front of us. And I do take Councillor Wilson's point at the beginning of the session that there's clearly a need to get a definitive resolution with this for Cranley, because it is seemingly something that's been going on for a little while. I mean, I've only been a member of Waverley Borough Council since 2017, and this is a subject that's come before a planning committee a couple of times and has certainly been hanging around in the background for even longer than that. So it clearly is something that needs to be addressed. As has been alluded to, the scheme seems to come down to a pretty straightforward assessment of community harm versus community benefit. When we considered this last time, I think we actually could have a bit more of a discussion about the level of community benefit of the scheme, as opposed to now, where there really doesn't seem to be any community benefit at all. The change from Surrey, and particularly the ICP, has pretty much eliminated any community benefit that the scheme brought at any point. The link between the care home and the housing is extremely tenuous. I'm inclined to fully agree with the parish's view on that, in regards to it being effectively a private development within the bounds of a care home application. I mean, that's exactly what it feels like to me. I think that's absolutely the case. So on the one hand, we've got very clear demonstrable harm to the ASVI, and Councillor Tyler of the parish council has illustrated that extremely clearly, so I'm not going to repeat everything she said. And on the community benefit side, I can't see anything now, even less than before. So the officer's report recommends refusal. It's against a pretty comprehensive list of policies, as Councillor Dinas has just illustrated. I'm the leader of a town council myself, and I take the very, very significant objections from the parish and the many, many hundreds and potentially thousands of objections from local residents with extreme weight as well. And so I'll be supporting the officer's recommendation for refusal. And as Councillor Dinas said, the list is pretty comprehensive, but actually I think there's a few more that could be added to that if we were minded to, but those are sufficient. And there's a paragraph, I apologise, I'm using the electronic version, which doesn't have page numbers in the individual sections of the report, but the penultimate paragraph before section 23, which starts the scale of public benefits proposed, effectively outlines in the report the view I've just put across almost completely, and that for me is the nub of the reasons for refusal. There is absolutely no community benefit against demonstrable community harm, so I'll be supporting this recommendation for refusal. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Cossa.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. One or two points I'd like to make. Could I first of all just register? I didn't press for deferral. I didn't think that was appropriate, but I do find it would have been helpful if we could have had a statement from, whether it's, I'm still not sure whether it's SCC or the care, the integrated care provider, but nonetheless we don't have that, so we're going to have to deal without it. I don't think you have to be a resident of Cranley to understand that there is an ongoing and quite bitter debate in that community around all of this. And I sometimes find that it colours the debates that come into this committee. It certainly did last time, and I'm hearing some of the same, at least from some of the members this time. They seem to boil down to two things, really. A lot of people seem to be terribly angry about whether this is all terribly fair because money was raised for another purpose. And there are those who are against this proposal who would argue that money should be returned and not used, I suspect, for pretty much almost any other purpose. There are others who, on the other side of that debate, I think, who are suggesting that we have to get more realistic. Things have changed and we have to find a proposal that does provide some benefit to the community. The other argument I've heard developing this evening, I'm not sure we're at all in a position to address very easily as a planning committee, nor am I sure how far it is relevant, is the whole issue about the viability of this scheme. You know, is it actually needed? That's where, again, that statement would have been helpful. Is it going to make sense? It's on the margins of viability. And I just think we're getting sidetracked by that. What we need to focus on, Councillor Dean has said, I very much got a lot of time for what he said, probably the best contribution I've heard so far to the debate, drew our attention to the planning issues and so on. But could I just question, to some extent, the harm that our planning officers have identified? One thing I would like to clarify is if you go to page 47 of the report, it does seem to me, if I've read this rightly and the things are aligned in the right columns, that the proposal we have before us today is less in footprint and less in total floor area than both the approved proposal of some years ago and the proposal that we saw last time. And I'm therefore struggling just a little bit to understand why there is this huge clamour apparently developing in the committee about, you know, what a huge, bulky, terrible proposal this is. If we've approved something, you know, that is bigger on the site before, and it is smaller, both, as I say, in footprint and total floor area. If I've got that wrong, you must tell me. But that's my interpretation of the data that we've been presented with. I would also say that there were comments around the screening of the site. I, like other people, I'm sure, I've been to the site and so on, and there is a fair amount of tree screening there, and the proposal does include for more tree screening. Our officers are not saying that there's any significant detriment to local residents in Whisker Drive. So I'm not quite going along with the arguments about this being too bulky and so on. The other thing is, I do understand, and probably it's the one argument that's pushing me the other way, is that it isn't an area that we have to pay great attention to. It's not, can't remember what the words were that Councillor Townsend used, but suggested that it was quite some way from the town centre. It's immediately abuts the built up area. So, you know, let's not get too precious about that. All I really want to do, Chairman, I'd certainly like some clarification of the footprint and total floor areas from the officers, but all I'd like us to do is just try and clear our minds about some of these very, very emotive political arguments in Cranley, which I don't actually think we're in a position to resolve or are particularly relevant to our considerations, and try and address just the planning issues.
Thank you very much. Before I come to the next speaker, Kate Edwards, would you like to comment on that point? I see you have your hand raised.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair, for the opportunity to comment, and thank you, Councillor Costa, for the questions. In relation to the matter of the footprint, you are correct that it is reduced from the previous applications, and I believe it's equal to the a previous consented scheme, and I appreciate that must in some respects cause confusion in relation to the recommendation. I've outlined in effect that I think the position in relation to both the benefits of the scheme and the harm of the scheme has altered since the application. Whilst it may be argued that the reduction in footprint has reduced the impacts, in my view, that reduction in footprint hasn't been so substantial as to wholly address those impacts, particularly given that the development is, as it remains to be, spread across the site. In relation to the previous consent which was on the site, that was for a community hospital and health centre, so it was a direct primary care benefit which there was considered to be a need for at that time. So in relation to that application, the officer assessment of what was the public benefit of the scheme was judged to be a lot higher. In relation to this application, my assessment of the community benefits of the scheme, which certainly there are community benefits, I'm not at all saying that there are no benefits, but my assessment is that those benefits are fairly significantly reduced from the benefit of the previous scheme, which would be providing a hospital for the whole of Cranley. In relation to the comments on screening, it's certainly the case that the applicant has put forward that the site would be well screened and that they would be increasing the screening by providing further trees. But in terms of the officer assessment, this wouldn't wholly remove the development from view. It would remain visible from several points, and it would clearly have an urbanising impact, including when, as well as the very large buildings, when the large area of parking is considered in terms of its visual impact. So I do appreciate what you're saying there, but it's not the officer's view that it would be sufficiently screened to mean that it would have no adverse impact on the ASBI. In relation to saying that it's harder to determine without a statement from the ICP, the ICP is formed in part by the CCG, who are representing the NHS, and the local provider of older persons care, in this case Surrey County Council. And we have actually received a statement from Surrey County Council indicating that they don't have a need for further beds in terms of the way that they operate to refer people into care. So in that respect, that is covered within the consideration. And finally, on the issue of whether the site is near to the town centre, I agree that it's not a large distance from the centre of the village, but it is outside of the settlement boundary, and it is within an ASBI, and the test which applies under policy is in relation to RE1 and countryside beyond the green belt outside of a settlement boundary, where we're thinking about preserving the character and beauty of the countryside unless there's something which indicates otherwise. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Councillor Ellis.
Thank you, Chairman. I will start off by saying there is a huge amount of support locally for this application. It's not totally against the wishes of the entire number of residents of Cranley. And as a long-term resident of Cranley, and having in the past visited the cottage hospital far too often with our children, usually following on a Sunday afternoon some sort of accident or other, I shared the residents' grave concerns when the NHS announced its proposal to close it and subsequently close the community beds. For 20 years now, the community has worked hard in many innovative ways to raise funds to replace our much loved cottage hospital, and have supported and been supported in the shared aim by a committee of honourable fellow residents. During those intervening years, many things have changed and continue to do so, including the healthcare facilities in Cranley, which have considerably improved. We now have a replacement award-winning health centre that provides many extra healthcare services and has room to expand as the population it serves increases. More importantly, we do still have our cottage hospital where consultants hold regular surgeries, modern and up-to-date diagnostic facilities have been installed, and the various departments such as physio are very busy and save people a long and difficult journey to the Royal Surrey across Guildford. But what we do not have, and was always recognised as a wonderful facility, are the community beds. And due to the age and nature of the cottage hospital, which is a listed building, it cannot be adapted to suit current and improved requirements. In my opinion, my personal opinion, and the opinion of others in the village, the provision of 16 community beds included within this application will complement and improve the current and existing healthcare facilities for our residents. And actually, there are so many changes occurring within the NHS, I really question their statement that suddenly sufficient beds are available to answer the needs. They haven't been for so many years now. There are excellent nursing homes within the area that serve the ageing population very well. Most of them are hugely expensive. And I believe that the care home facilities associated with this application will be financially available to a great number of Cranley people who will be closer to their families and their loved ones. There is the added benefit of the affordable housing of an improved standard over previous applications for 14 key workers who currently find the cost of accommodation in Cranley prohibitive. I believe that the principle of development at the site has previously been established, and that in this application, the bulk and the mass of the two buildings has been displayed, as well as in the footprint, have been significantly reduced. The two buildings have been moved further from the properties in John Whisker Drive, with the trees and the footpath on the boundary between. The site is very close and central to the High Street, the Cranley High Street, a matter of feet almost away, with the public car park close by, allowing easy access to friends and family. I am very supportive of protecting the countryside and the beauty of the area in which we live, but permission was granted for the large-scale housing development, as previously mentioned, and now largely built in Knoll Lane and is directly opposite the site. Because of the reduction of scale and footprint of the care home facility, the number of community beds is reduced to 16, which is still a great gain for our community that answers a recognised need. And the affordable accommodation is an added asset. Whilst I do accept that this application is very different to the original aspirations of the community, I do believe that it has, as it needed to, adapted to current needs and what has been provided in other ways, how current business, the NHS and adult care services operate, and that the facilities under consideration are viable and will be of great benefit to the community. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chairman. As an outsider from Cranley, but knowing Cranley quite well, and looking at the amount of house building, the thought did occur to me that a green space opposite all of the housing that is going to be built, to me, looks more beneficial to the people of Cranley at the moment than a care home, which seems, shall we say, we don't know about the community beds. We don't know very much about it anyway. We don't know about the benefits of the community. To me, at the moment, they seem to be pie in the sky. I really do think that keeping that green space for all of those people that are going to be living in the new housing is much more beneficial to the community of Cranley than something that could well be a white elephant, or worse, something that could be found not to be financially viable and turn, because we allowed it to be built, into any kind of housing. We've seen enough of this with buildings that have gone out of use. I also understand that there is a county council nursing home in Cranley, or care home in Cranley, which is actually locked up and being left to rot. So I do think green space at the moment, if circumstances change, then obviously we can change, but the circumstances at the moment are, it's not necessary. And I think green space is. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. I have two speakers who want to come back, but before that, Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with an awful lot of what everyone else has said, but I must remind Councillor Ellis that the hospital beds that we were promised to be free at the point of delivery. I think maybe that's escaped her. We have so many care homes within the village and within 3 or 4 miles of the village. The old rectory, Knoll Park, Cedar Court, even Berkeley House. My own parents had carers that visited from Berkeley House. We've got providers within the village, Novus Care and Bright Care. There is no benefit to the community of this building, and the green space that Councillor Wilson talked about is really representing the green lung for people living very, very close in John Whisker Drive, just as the Commons provide the green lung for people living as far out as Rowley. I will not be supporting this application. Like so many residents of Cranley, I supported the village hospital and still do, and commend what's been done there by the health authority. But this is not a hospital. There is no benefit for the residents who will have to pay for these beds. So I really will rest my case there, and I will be voting against this application. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Follows, you wanted to briefly come back.
Yes, sorry. First off, Councillor Wilson and Reid have raised the point about the amenity of the current space, which is something we hadn't really touched upon, but I think it's definitely a valid point that should be made. I know we need to detach ourselves a bit from the emotive part of this, but it obviously is important. There's a very significant community issue here, and that's why it's in the report. And Councillor Ellis is right. There is support for this application. I know it's not quite 2-to-1 objection, but it's not far off. And so, practically any change to those houses, those dwellings from the previous application is going to be an improvement, because the previous application was such a low baseline that quite literally any change would have been an improvement as far as I'm concerned. They were tiny rabbit hutches that were barely fit to be called anything, and I was actually offended when they were called affordable housing last time round. It was quite troubling to me that it was being presented in that way. So going very briefly back to the planning matters, this is non-compliant to 8 of our own planning policies, and it's not just no comment from Surrey and the ICP, but a clear statement that they don't actually need this, and then with a statement of viability saying it's borderline. I mean, really, this is a no-brainer, and to be honest, it probably shouldn't have even come to committee, and at some point I will ask the question as to why it has. But as far as I'm concerned right now, this should be refused as per officer's recommendations.
Thanks very much. Councillor Denis, you wish to briefly come back.
And I will be brief. Obviously living close to Cranley, I'm aware of a lot of the history, and you will note from what I've said tonight, I have not strayed from the factual report and policy. And therefore that gives me the way to make a decision. I haven't got into the emotions. It's purely on planning grounds. And every point I made is factual and is in planning. Just a couple of things that I never raised about the urbanising effect. I know we just about touched on it, but it is an urbanising effect. And I was going to finish off saying there's 8 policy breaches, but again, that's been raised. So I've said my bit. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Well, I don't have any more speakers. Kate, do you want to come back at all before I take the vote?
No, there's nothing else from me. Thank you, Chair. And just to reiterate, in relation to voting, that the voting is to accept officer recommendation and refuse the application.
Yes, thank you very much. The recommendation is on page 62 of our papers, which is a recommend to refuse. So we'll set the voting in motion, and the if you're for a refusal, you vote for if you're wanting a refusal.
Share the results there. So that's 11 votes in favour of the recommendation to refuse, 1 against and 1 abstention. So that is refused.
Thank you very much indeed, Fiona. On going back to the agenda, item 9, there aren't any items. Item 10, we don't need to exclude the press and public. So that, I think, concludes the meeting. And thank you very much indeed. Thank you. And thank you particularly to Kate for an excellent report and keeping us well briefed. Thank you very much.
Chairman,
thank you for stepping in, Chairman.
Chairman, could I just say, before you
you.
leave, could I just say thank you to Richard Cole, because this is his last meeting,
yes.
and we won't see him again, kind of thing here. And I personally just wanted to thank him for his role as chairman. He's been a great chairman, and I felt, you know, that I wanted to thank him before we have no chance to thank him.
Very much second that. And I very much hope that he won't abandon the committee entirely, either as a sub or a full member. But I'm sure we'll jump that on in